Hi everyone, I'm Cody Root. This is the Church of Logic. Today, like the 1990s Salt and Pepper classic, we're going to talk about sets. Okay, that was awful. So, what is set theory? I'm going to talk about ZFC a little bit, and I think I'm going to try and demystify it. When I was a kid, I used to read everything I could get my hands on in terms of popular treatments of mathematics. And they talked about set theory as this kind of mystical, magical theory that could explain so much. But as I got older, I realized that, ZFC, which is a popular formalization of set theory, is just a bunch of axioms in first-order logic. And like I said, first-order logic can be seen as kind of an interface in which to specify, like an API in programming language. You want to talk about some object, first order logic gives you a framework to do that. And you can describe operations. In set theory, the only meaningful operation is membership. You have this abstract object called sets, and one set can be the element of another set. Right? It's a little confusing because it's sets all the way down, right? The members of sets are themselves sets, and their members are sets, etc. But, there's nothing too mysterious, right? It's just describing what you would expect to describe in terms of sets. You have operations for building new sets. You have ways of talking about relationships between sets. Is one set a subset of another set? And ZFC just describes this kind of framework, and it tells you, hey, here are the operations you can do on sets, and these are the things these operations must satisfy, right? Like if two sets have exactly the same elements, then those two sets are equal. They're the same set. That's the first axiom. And then a bunch of axioms to just define operation, right? If you have two things, two sets, you can form the set that is just the pair of those two elements, right? You can just put them into a bag, and that is another set. If you have a set of sets, you can just take the set that's all the elements inside those sets, right? So if you have a set with 1, 2, 3, and you have a set with 2, 3, 4, then you can form the set that contains 1, 2, 3, 4, and etc. And all these are really common sense axioms, except a couple that I'll talk about. What's cool about the theory, and the reason it's studied so much, is that using these basic operations on sets, you can encode a whole bunch of stuff. In particular, you can basically encode any mathematical concept that you would normally come up with in the course of doing mathematics. And this was a realization, in the early 20th century, is that you could build a whole theory of sets, and then you could use that to encode all the other things you were doing with numbers and functions and operations and structures. You could encode all that using this very basic theory, and that made it very convenient because you sort of had this core axiomatic structure, and it only takes a few lines to describe this kind of thing, but it's enough, right? It's enough to have that to be able to do all of mathematics. So as long as you can trust this core, set of operations, you can sort of trust all of mathematics. So this is kind of clever, right? It's like the observation that, hey, if you have a core number of operations on, say, strings of bits or, byte streams, then you only need a few things like loops and branches, and you can have a whole programming language, and you can kind of compile everything down to these base operations. This is exactly the same operations except with sets. Let me give an example. So in general, these pairs I talked about, if you have A and B, you can form the set that contains just A and B, just those two elements. Well, first of all, it's kind of obvious that you can form a set that contains just a single element just by taking the pair of A and A, right? The fact that it's there twice, doesn't really count, because in sets, only membership matters. There's no notion of how many times it's there in the set. And okay, so that's cool, but it's an unordered pair, right? You put A and B and you put B and A, then those are really the same set. They have the same elements, and so they are the same set. But all these clever logicians realize, hey, we don't need to define a notion of ordered pair, because we can just be clever and take the set that contains the following pair. The first element is just the set that contains A. So you take the set that contains A, and the second element is the set that contains A and B. Right? So now you have a pair of sets, and that pair is the set that contains A and the set that contains A and B. And it turns out that that's enough to get an ordered pair of A and B, because it just says, hey, I know which one was first. It is the one that is in the set that only contains one element. And the second one is in the set that contains two elements, and it's the other element. So that's kind of cool, right? It's this trick that you can use to encode an ordered pair. And once you have an ordered pair, you rely on this other axiom that says, hey, if I have a set, I also have the set of all of its subsets. That is a set. It's called the power set. It's a very important concept. And once I have a set, I also have all of its subsets. If I can describe a subset, then that also is a set. That's called comprehension. And with those two, you can start talking about the set of all possible pairs where the elements are in two sets that you already know about. And once you have that set of all possible pairs, you can encode functions. A function in set theory is just a set of pairs where the first element is the input and the second element is the output. So now you've encoded all these things, right? You have subsets, you have functions, you have pairs, and it's not too hard to imagine how you can get numbers. And the last kind of nail in the coffin to say, okay, we can really talk about maths, is being able to describe an infinite set. So here you, again, need a little bit of cleverness to say, what does it mean for a set to be infinite? And once you have that, can I prove that there's an infinite set? The answer, to kind of give away the punchline a little bit early, is you have to assume that there exists an infinite set as an axiom. You can't prove that there's an infinite set in general. You have to assume it as an axiom. But once you assume it as an axiom, you can prove all sorts of infinite sets exist. So how do you say that a set is infinite? Well, there are two techniques, and the techniques turn out to give the same answer, at least in classical mathematics. The first trick is you want to define an operation that takes a set and returns a different set. And that operation, it doesn't really matter what that operation is, though often it consists of taking a set and adding that set that contains that other set to a new set, right? So if you have a set X, you take the set Y, which is just all the elements of X plus the set that contains X itself. And that, it turns out, has to be different from X. There's another axiom that says, oh, this really cannot be X itself. So you have a new set Y. And then the trick here is if I take a set that contains all, for any element it contains, it also contains this new set that I built from that element called the successor, right? If this set I just described is the successor of X, then any set that for all of its elements it also contains its successor, you can pretty much guarantee that set has to be infinite, because the successor builds a new set that has to be distinct from all the previous ones. And so you can sort of say, okay, well, any element I take in there, there's going to be also a new, completely different set in there. And that describes an infinite set. And the other trick is a trick, first described by Dedekind. and it's called Dedekind infinite. He realized that if you had functions, right, you could take a set and you could ask, okay, well, does this set have a function from it to another set that happens to be itself again? And is that function one-to-one? And okay, well, there's some easy examples there. Just the identity function is one of those examples. But imagine that the image of that function is a strict subset, so it excludes at least one element. Can that function be one-to-one, right? Can it be injective? And the answer there is you cannot do that if you only have finite sets. You can't have a function from a set to itself which excludes an element and which is one-to-one. You can't do that. But it's very easy to do it in a case of an infinite set, right? If you take the natural numbers and you map the set of all natural numbers to, say, the set of even numbers, well, that's very easy to do. You just multiply by 2. But you see, if you truncate the numbers at some point, and you only have a finite set, you can't do that anymore. You don't know where to send those last ones because they overflow. So just assume that there is a set with a map that is one-to-one to itself and that excludes at least one element. And there you've assumed the existence of an infinite set. So once you've done that, you now have a theory of sets, and you have an axiom that says there is an infinite set. And as we've seen, you can construct a whole bunch, essentially all of the mathematical constructions that you want to do. And studying this theory is going to tell you how trustworthy your foundations of mathematics is. So the logicians have been doing this for, over a century now. And they've come up with some really interesting and amazing insights, which I will talk about at the next episode. Until then, take care.